grant funding program, the key objectives. So Senate Bill 1 has a couple of grant funding sources. Ryan went over those yesterday. So the first one in purple is the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. And that program really we see is focused on multimodal projects within a corridor. There has to be some sort of corridor plan for that, but that, it's multimodal. It's not just one thing like vehicle oriented issues or transit only. The more we see that it covers various modes, the better. And then the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, TCIP, is very oriented towards freight and goods movement. So naturally, you want to just make sure that you're lined up with those key objectives and what that funding program is oriented towards. And then think about environmental clearance, right? We talked about that a little bit yesterday. Is it important to have environmental clearance already processed and you've already got some sort of document completed that you could point to, or can it just be part of the grant request? And then if you're going to use federal funds or pursue some sort of funding program that will require some sort of environmental clearance from the NEPA side, how would that potentially affect your project schedule if you've got it already? That's a strategic decision point. And typically, I guess I would say that the bigger the dollar amount, the larger the project, the more likely you might consider federalizing a project. All right, let's keep going. So I want to use an example. This is in Placer, Sacramento Gateway, to talk about how these two regions have collaborated and aligning their goals and efforts with a multimodal or the right funding program. Right, so on the screen, there's a lot of stuff going on here, so I'll try and narrate this. On the left with the circles, you show that there were multiple agencies that came together on both sides of the county line, so Placer County and Sacramento County, and that includes the regional transportation planning agencies, their transit agencies, Caltrans, of course, the local agencies and jurisdictions as well. They even had a strategy team and then a larger PDT that was a bigger group as well. So all these different agencies came together a few years ago and evaluated all the modal needs within this corridor along the Interstate 80, and really identified what are all the various multimodal improvements in the area within this corridor. And this really lined them up for the solutions for congested corridors. The graphic on the right is showing all the various project ideas and color coded based on the mode, of course. So roadway or TSM projects or transit and active transportation, bicycle and pedestrian projects. It did yield a lot, right? 150 projects. So it's not likely that they would simply go and pursue a grant for all 150 projects, but this is the beginning of the funnel, really trying to say, here's a depth of project ideas, and then through their analysis, they can then narrow in on what are the projects that have the best project readiness, which ones achieve the goals of the grant funding program the best, which ones achieve the best vehicle miles travel reduced, for example, or other benefits like benefiting disadvantaged communities, other value evaluations, other criteria. So then, we use this an example to really show this multimodal, multi-agency coordination. Someone's dog is barking there. That's good. So, all right. I think on the next slide, Ryan, go ahead. We talk about how do you get all these agencies together? So within Placer, Sacramento County, this coordination is happening across multiple agency representatives. So in prior courses, we've had the question, how do we start that, right? Sometimes I've been to different meetings between two different jurisdictions, and you've got a lot of staff meeting each other for the first time. So how do you get this large circle of agencies all to come together? And sometimes it's as simple as coffee and pastries, trying to invite people to a breakfast meeting or something to that effect instead of a 10 a.m. or something. We all have to deal with that relative to virtual meetings, but of course, when there's those in-persons, maybe having it first thing with the food is a nice way to make it happen. In some cases, I've seen where getting an elected official involved can help force the issue. As an agency staff person, you're always going to have to be careful about how you dip your toes into that arena, into the water there, and decide if that's good or bad, right? Certainly, we have some elected officials that, that aren't always the best about bringing everyone together. And maybe it's more intimidating for an elected official to ask staff to come to a meeting. But, when there's a passionate individual really focused on your project type, typically transportation, we would be focused on, then maybe that can really help ensure that you're getting the right people from agencies together and at least a representative from the relevant agencies. And start thinking about project goals and identify where there's some overlap between those agencies. And I mentioned it out loud, but certainly you don't want to overlap or miss out on the opportunity of bringing in those regional transportation agencies, Caltrans as well. There's plenty of overlap in the goals and objectives of various agencies, and really trying to have a big audience, a big tent event where you've got a lot of people coming together. All right, let's keep going. Another thing that we definitely want to talk about was, I mentioned yesterday, identifying underserved or disadvantaged communities. And I mentioned that here, that in the prior project, that narrowing in your 150 projects to something that's better addressing key criteria is important. So here on the screen, we have a map that shows in the San Diego region, the Cal Virus screen scoring on the various census tracts in the San Diego area. So there's two colors here for red and blue. One is showing the current set of Cal Virus screen, and then the color variation shows Cal Virus screen 3.0, I think is the blue probably. So it turned out that some of that changed. So I think we can just go with the map that shows 4.0. But part of the point of showing this is if you have a project that's in Imperial Beach in the southern area of this region that is near the state, the border with Mexico, there's not a lot of designated disadvantaged communities in that area. That if benefiting disadvantaged communities is really important for this funding program, we're going to need to find a way that there's a nexus to either overlap with disadvantaged communities with your project, or that you can really think about how you can still benefit those underserved communities, even if your project lines don't overlap with those designated census tracts. If that's a key item associated with that funding program, then it's just going to be almost a prerequisite. So we've seen certain funding programs. The Clean California grant application came out earlier this year, and effectively all of the grant funding went towards benefiting disadvantaged communities. In the active transportation program, for example, while the legislation requires only 25% of it benefit disadvantaged communities, the reality is that the final scoring over the prior cycles is showing, 80-90% of the grant funding is going towards disadvantaged communities. So if you've got a community and you've got some projects that are quite some distance from disadvantaged communities, or they don't directly benefit them, then that may be a prerequisite that you need to consider. Okay, let's go to the next one. Another thing I mentioned out loud was vehicle miles traveled, right? So you might think about how you achieve the benefits, in this case, of like air quality or vehicle miles traveled of your singular project, or how do I really achieve that benefit with multiple projects? So on the screen, we show the image from Santa Cruz County. I think Ryan mentioned it a bit yesterday. They have a project idea along Highway 1 where they've got multiple modes, and they've really said along multiple corridors, we're going to do different types of things. So there's a corridor for active transportation program. There is improvements along the highway where they're doing bus on shoulder. And they've got a roadway corridor that's getting complete streets application implemented. So collectively, you might have vehicle miles traveled or air quality benefit achieved when you bring all these projects together. And the graphic in the bottom right is showing that scenario where you might have one or two project components that technically might increase the VMT. If those are singular independent project grant application, it's just not going to achieve your goals. But if you combine those or bundle them with some other projects that definitely achieve those benefits collectively, you're going to get the reduction in the VMT together. And the reality is we certainly see that with throughout the state, there's a variety of project types out there, and you might be challenged as agency staff to try and get funding for a project that doesn't necessarily directly benefit a disadvantaged community or doesn't decrease VMT and maybe does increase VMT. So we know that agency staff throughout the state are just trying to balance those issues with what the policies are that are coming out with each of these funding programs. So bundling may be a mechanism for you to overcome that constraint or challenge. Okay. Any questions on that? Let's see. Let me double check the chat. So Joel pointed out, certainly with the ATP, yes. So Joel's essentially said what I didn't say out loud was the reality is with the active transportation program, it's a highly competitive. And if you're not going to benefit disadvantaged communities, for example, then it really does become a required or prerequisite. And then, okay, the rest is information and course materials from Dustin. This graphic shows that example from Santa Cruz, where you've got these various lines that are going effectively east-west here. The one closest to the ocean is the Rails with Trails corridor project. And then the one along SoCal Drive, there's a green line that kind of zigzags across the other one. That's an arterial roadway that's getting complete streets improvements, primarily buffered bike lanes and some pedestrian improvements to shorten crossing distances. And then along Highway 1, Highway 1 in that area is a bus on shoulder transit improvements. There's been a long running evaluation on what to do with this highway in the area, and certainly adding general purpose lanes is not desired on the freeway from a state policy perspective, and within the community that's been certainly not the preferred option for quite some time. But you see here this band, you could really say within this area, this constrained transportation network, it's a multimodal approach to achieve a lot of benefits. Okay. All right, so with that, I wanted to ask if everyone can weigh in on this poll. Has your community bundled some sort of projects, multiple projects for some larger grant pursuit? Yes, no, not a chance, maybe. All right, so I think we're definitely going to see a lot more going forward in the poll. So far, we've got, let me see how many people. We have almost 80 people on the call so far, and good amount of answered. So about 50% are saying yes, about a quarter are saying no, and then a quarter are saying maybe. So we definitely are starting to see more and more focus on combining and bundling multiple project types for those grant pursuits, and it really does seem to line up nicely with a lot of the goals that we're seeing from the state. All right, any questions there before I go to the next module? Okay. All right. Turn it off. So the next one we want to talk through is efforts for community engagement. Right, a lot of grant funding programs, we're seeing this as crucial, and talk a bit about the purpose and mechanisms for it. So we start with a poll. How do you get involved with public engagement? Or do you get involved? Yes, no, if my boss tells me so. Right, so a lot of you on this call might be involved directly with grant writing, also engineering or planning, administration work across the board, environmental. So I know I mean, I went to the school for civil engineering, and I definitely did not have a course in public engagement, anything to that effect. But it is part of the job for at least 70% of the people on this call. And then about 20% are saying when directed. And then just a few of you, not so much. So maybe you delegate that out and focus on other things. But the majority of this group is out there participating in the public engagement as well as writing the grants. And typically, I think that's going to give you a greater insight if you're writing some sort of narrative to really figure out how do I convey the key messages and what we're hearing from the community. So we're going to spend some time talking about various mechanisms for public engagement and the purpose for that. All right. So what is our goal, right? And my perspective is certainly that community input really confirms a project is viable and sought by your community stakeholders, right? And if you're a grant funding agency, you want to see the public engagement has happened and has occurred so that there's ownership and it will manage and mitigate future conflicts. If you've got something that's going to change, with the trade-offs, it's going to change what the roadway system or your network looks like, then we want to show that there was this healthy amount of public engagement prior to the actual project implementation, and people weighed in on it, or you've got those stakeholders that are going to stand up at a meeting and say, 4 years ago, I helped vote on this thing, and we decided this was the best project, and can manage a vocal minority that might seem to appear out of nowhere to have opposition to a project. Really, the grant funding agency just wants to see that those funds are going to be spent and they're not going to be delayed, that we're going to avoid project cancellations. And that community engagement is a nice proxy for that. So we want to talk through different mechanisms for community engagement. We certainly have a depth of things, and it's always evolving. So the most obvious ones, I have some on the screen, and then I'll walk through some more as we go. Things like public workshops, whether it's in person or virtual, tabling or pop-up events where you are going to some sort of existing event. I'm going to this community festival. I'm going to this otherwise annual advertised event. I don't need to draw people in. So I'm just going to take advantage of that captive audience to participate in something. If you've got something where you're trying to identify the needs and really show the community how there's gaps in the system or the network, then a bike or walk audits, those types of things can be helpful. Getting parents to walk around the school to understand how safe route to school improvements could be employed. And I mentioned, schools, it might be that you also are engaging the students. So I've worked with, for example, the Orange County Healthcare Agency here in Orange County has done a lot of work with after-school students, student programs, where they are talking through with the students, what are the types of issues with the sidewalk? And it could be as simple as some sort of blockage or some gap in the sidewalk or buckled sidewalks, all the way to difficulty in crossing roadways in designated locations, understanding how the traffic signal works. Those types of engagements and participation is a great way to really get a mix of perspectives, and you can catch things that you might otherwise miss. Demonstration events, also known as tactical urbanism or sometimes pop-up as well, is an encouragement effort to really show what a project might look like. Yesterday, I had an image of a separated bikeway shown in Humboldt County. And there's a lot of those. We'll want to highlight some of the efforts throughout the state that are occurring, frankly, for doing that, to really show the public what is this idea, and using temporary equipment and materials to demonstrate a civil engineering concept. So we have some images and some graphics on the following slides to show some of that. Online mapping and surveys might be a nice way to really allow people to participate at their own time and schedule. So having some sort of digital interface is pretty common and often expected. And then, you could have a mixture. I mentioned virtual workshops or workshops in person, as well as tabling at some captive audience, some other event, and you could bring those together. So we've done some work, for example, safety fairs oriented towards multiple schools in particular. So the sky's the limit, frankly, on your public engagement. And I really would encourage everyone to customize within your community. What are those opportunities for you to engage and get input and get the community to understand your project through awareness, or for them to participate? Now, I want to make sure that we also talk about, or let's see, the next one, go ahead, Ryan, is showing a couple more actually. So in our prior courses, we've asked people to weigh in on different things. What else are there? So we heard in a prior course, someone actually was able to print the survey for their project and get it into the local newspaper. And then they just prompted people to go ahead and return it at a designated time or a workshop. So you could stay for the workshop, of course, or you could just drop it off. And that mechanism provided people the time to really mentally think about and contemplate the project, and then provide their input and just handwrite the results or do the check boxes. Putting things on door hangers. Here you see a graphic where we simply had a small 5x7 card that was printed, and we just stapled rubber bands to it and popped that on the door for homes in the vicinity of this event back in 2017 in concert with OC Parks and the local agencies, another Go Human event in Southern California. Mailing postcards can be another mechanism. There's some cost implication to both of those things, whether it's mailing things or walking the neighborhood and putting things on the door hanger. And then through COVID, we've certainly seen a lot of advancement of how we can do virtual engagement. And I've heard a lot of good props in different places where people have been able to do walk audits, for example, and virtual. So maybe it's a little more of a scavenger hunt type approach where you say, here are your designated points to go to or things to observe, and go ahead and do that on your own schedule, and then provide your input after or during, as a nice mechanism to allow people to participate without having to worry about COVID constraints. All right, let's keep going. So some of the things that I have talked about is kind of our typical various outreach efforts, but we also want to think about how are we engaging disadvantaged community members or the underserved? How do we equitably engage a wider range of audiences? So again, this is going to be highly customized to your region. So language translation is an obvious, really getting that out there and promoting it highly. So whether you have headsets and language translation in all your materials, your boards, your flyers, your PowerPoint presentations, if you have separate workshops, if you can manage all that. We've certainly seen with, I know Zoom has a nice mechanism for language translation that can be provided as well directly, and figuring out how you can achieve that might require some outreach consultants or staff that are practiced in all this to really know the ins and the outs of it in managing Zoom bombing or other weird things that might happen with online engagement. But anyways, thinking about with disadvantaged communities, how you really are reaching a greater audience and not just kind of your typical, well, we talked to the Bike Coalition and this is their input, that we reach to a bigger audience. And that might mean also that you're looking at non-transportation focused groups. So some sort of social groups, other advocacy groups, maybe religious groups that again provide a good captive audience and as a mechanism to reach people that aren't on your email distribution list. All right, let's keep going. Here we see a photograph. This is from Santa Ana, where there was an engagement event pre-COVID, of course. Look how close everyone is. So a great amount of people in the room there, and you've got agency staff, right? There's some shirts and ties there, button-up shirts, and then youth as well as parents. There's language translation occurring in parallel here with staff, some of the participants with headsets. So language translation occurring. This was done in a community center, so it was a trusted venue, right? Not just at City Hall or some other place that might be intimidating for a different audience. And then in this case, the kids are there participating. I think the girl with the bow in her hair, but other ones we've certainly seen where the community workshop has a dedicated space with activities for youth, whether it's Legos or drawing or coloring or snacks and things that can be done for kids, not necessarily playing on the Xbox. Maybe that would actually work, but having those opportunities where you advertise that there's going to be a space for kids and within visual for a parent to be able to see their kids, not necessarily just in another room. So you might think about that with your venue space. How can we have a dedicated area for youth that still can be nearby, but not distracting or problematic if there's a lot of noise? Okay, we'll keep going. Any questions? No. Here's an example with a walk audit around a schools project where the team did the walk audit with parents and students, and then afterwards went to essentially like the parent teacher organization space. They had a designated space at this school where the parents would come afterwards. And this was kind of like our professional consultant team dropped in on their daily get together with parents that were used to interacting with each other and hanging out, and really, it was their chance to weigh in and provide additional input. So, you might be able to tap into these mechanisms, these built up social structures within schools and organizations to then get additional input and document everything, right? So here are the photos, the prior photos, these photos. This is the Paul Martin collection of photos, right? That these moments of like, hey, this is going to be important for me to remember or get a snapshot of this, and donuts and all, right? So go ahead, the next one, Brian. Same type of thing here. This is another event where we were able to get input on distribution for bike helmets and bike lights. And the youth that we see there, these are like 18 and younger students from Santa Ana that were participating in this KidWorks effort to really help out with distribution of the bike lights and helmets. And so they were planners for their projects, right? This is them participating and not even in college level, but on the right, you see the helmet being handed to this person, and then on the left, someone's got the clipboard and he's taking notes. So there was a survey that someone would fill out and use. It was a good mechanism to get some input, but also part of a distribution. And I think this was Office of Traffic Safety program to distribute safety equipment that the city was able to get the grant and work with the local community-based organization to distribute these equipment and this material and get input. All right, keep going. All right, I mentioned earlier demonstration projects. So I'm always a cheerleader for some of these successful projects. So in the city of Westminster, all the way back to 2016, we demonstrated with the Southern California Association of Governments, the Go Human event in the city, demonstrated a separated bikeway, on-street bike lanes on wider streets, as well as a roundabout at this intersection. So the girl riding her rollerblade is from the high school. The city was able to coordinate with the high school and get a youth group to come out and help build that roundabout for the day. So the students were able to participate and learn about it. We talked about what the dimensions should be and chalked out where things would go. And they were able to put the plants and the materials that you see. So this was just a one-day event to be able to show the community what it could look like and how you could fit something like a roundabout into this really wide intersection. The streets are effectively overbuilt for the traffic volumes at this location. So that demonstration, of course, has turned into a project that for a separated bikeway that got an urban greening grant and will build what's called the Mendez Trail. So Mendez is a desegregation case that predates Brown versus Board of Education. So within the state of California, desegregation occurred first, and then it rolled up to the national level after. And within the city, they're building the separated bikeway and information and kiosks about that desegregation case that occurred in the city of Westminster. And it'll be a learning opportunity for students in the local schools to have an outdoor event, field trip type thing, where that separated bikeway will go. All right, next slide. I mentioned one of those opportunities was a safety fair. Here was an event where we were able to work with the city of Anaheim and their police department, and again, the Orange County Healthcare Agency to promote within 3 distinct schools a safety fair where students and parents were encouraged at these elementary schools to come and meet the police and get a bike helmet and bike lights, bring their bike for tune-up, that kind of thing, and then to be able to ride with Oscar El Oso. So that's our mascot, or the mascot for the Anaheim Police Department, and shows up in various safety videos. This is something that's going to work for this age cohort, but you definitely will want to customize based on your community. And this was really targeted towards these 3 schools. So it was an opportunity to say, with these 3 schools, come to this event, and then they were all able to get information and safety tips and have a positive engagement with their local police and fire as well. All right, let's keep going. We mentioned workshops, and I was talking about virtual workshops, certainly Zoom providing a lot of opportunities to help with language translation. But everyone I talk to really mentions virtual workshops require a lot of logistics. And if it's hybrid, it's more complicated. Actually, I had a project last month where we had a hybrid approach to a virtual workshop, and our outreach consultant was at the venue and in person, and they could not get the system to sync with us doing the virtual engagement as well as the hybrid. So they had the PowerPoint slides and they had to run through it separately in person, and then we ran through the digital version. So anyone that was online got to hear from me, and then anyone that was in person heard from our outreach consultant. So it was more like we had 2 workshops in parallel. So you can, the text there says potentially greater each, but it should be reach with an R in front. So you might be able to get to a greater audience. You can have that language translation. I'm really seeing a variety in agencies' perspectives about virtual workshops. Some really want to get back in person, and some are still pushing for virtual workshops as a mechanism for a greater number of participants to attend without having to deal with dinner for the family or childcare or any of those types of things, schedule logistics of just getting to a venue. So you'll have to think about how that works within your community and what fits really. All right, we'll keep going. At least with the virtual workshops, we do suggest that you keep it dynamic, and it's got to be concise. Really, in person, you can read the room and really figure out, we need to move this along, or we need to really pause and spend some time on this topic. When it's virtual, you're going to have to really figure out how to keep it snappy and move along, and also keep it interactive and find ways for that input. So there's a variety of tooling systems out there. On the image on the right, you see the Mentimeter tool, where there was an example of 3 different options, and the public was able to score them. On that one, it's agree to disagree is our range there, and you could see even in the Mentimeter tool, it gives a good messaging scoring to show graphically. The very bottom one, for example, the volume of people that scored it 5 or 4, and effectively no one scored it at 2 because the wave dropped at the 2 marker. And then if you do have a virtual engagement, you can record it. So we've done some workshops where we've done more of a presentation and then say at the end, now we want you to fill out the survey. So less about being interactive and just a quick presentation that then goes through a survey and allows the public to score things on their own. So you might say, let me explain what these options are, and then I'm going to move on. At the end, you can access the survey, and then you can stare at them more carefully and then score each of them. All right, let's keep going. So with that, we want to ask everyone to fill out this poll. Which engagement activity do you think has been most effective? And in the chat, I think here a lot of times we've encouraged people to weigh in essentially on the least effective. I don't think we built in a poll for it, but maybe less about what's least effective and what challenges have you had relative to engagement that I might not have touched on. Keep tabs. Also, of course, I'm always all ears if someone's got some other nice engagement activity that they've done that they thought was a tool that the group could benefit from hearing about. Feel free to use the chat to let us know about some other engagement opportunity that wasn't discussed. All right, so let's see, I gotta make this larger. It's a good amount of options here. All right, so I'm seeing, let's see. Yeah, did you share this, Ryan? It's shared. So then on this poll, we're seeing, yeah, about a third of you mentioned in-person workshops. Virtual workshops is on there, about 11% noted virtual workshops. And then demonstration events was scored high. I did mention the demonstration events and some of these examples. I would note, you know, that takes a good amount of time to prep for, right? And really think through the logistics and promotion. Who acquires those materials? How do you even transport them? Do you get a U-Haul for the day, or do you have access to vehicles that can carry things? So the demonstration events I really like, but it definitely, I get my steps in and really get, as I joked, the last one, it was like CrossFit, because we're carrying materials here to and fro, and it was a bit of a workout. So having enough labor to really help out with things can be important. So anyways, in-person workshops, demonstration events, tabling events, virtual workshops. So less about the online mapping or mailing to various addresses. So there's not like a single one that's always just the sure thing. Workshops is kind of a given, I think, and then you're going to pick and choose what's going to work the best for your community thereafter. All right, then any questions or anything in the chat that anyone wanted to mention? I suggest too, if you've got something like, we tried doing this outreach and it just didn't land for whatever reason. I know another example that I wanted to point out was we did another virtual workshop in a community, and it was just at the beginning of this month. We're still in June, earlier this month. And within the community area, apparently there was a power outage the time that we did it. So a good thing we recorded it, because effectively the people in that community that we were hoping to participate were offline. There was one person that participated via their phone because they had, you know, access essentially. But otherwise, you know, you might be subject to those things that are a little out of your control. Someone else had said, don't schedule it when the Warriors were playing basketball as well, or, you know, like trying to navigate the dynamics of the high school graduation and some big sports event is probably going to be hard. You know, at least with high school graduation, you can see the schedule. But yeah, let's see, there's a comment about heavy snows. Yeah, so if you're in a part of the community, the state that's got snow, for example, you're going to have to think about that. And the randomness of the weather. I guess that's the kind of thing we just can't plan for. But trying to be flexible and anticipate, what if no one can come because of X? Do we need to record it so that we've got that information and it's available at the least? Might be an important what if discussion. All right, then I'll hand it back off. Are we ready for a break, Ryan?
We are ready for a break.
Let's do that. So it is at about 9:19. So maybe we meet back at 9:30. Everyone could get
9:30. So we will go ahead and get restarted back up and jump into our next module. And I'll be talking about advanced dialogue with funding agencies, and just how important we've found that to be. And Paul and I even had a discussion about a recent one that he had with a funding agency just yesterday. So we found it to be really, really important, and we'll just kind of go into why that is. Oh, but first, I want to start out with a quick poll just to see what kind of grant applications that everyone will be working on this year or have worked on this year. Did you just go through the active transportation program process, and maybe you're working on an HSIP application or highway safety improvement program? You're going to go after a local partnership program this fall, or a trade corridor enhancement program. Maybe you already did raise or the multimodal project development grant, and I see some great comments in the chat. D, all of the above. Yes, I totally understand that. And Jeff, good to see you. Yeah, lots of stuff people are working on, which is fantastic. I'll just give a couple more minutes here for individuals to respond. Okay, well, let's close the poll and let's see the results. So the majority of individuals, 38%, have done and are just got through doing the ATP grant. So congratulations for surviving. That's it is a big lift on those, and the web form can be a challenge, or the PDF form. Maybe it looks like 14% did HSIP or are doing HSIP, 27% on regional programs, 8% on local partnership program, and also on the RAISE, and then 5% on TSEP. And we got a couple in the chat saying yes, multiple, which is great. So that's maybe the next time around, I'll have to change this this poll from a single choice to a multiple choice. That way we provide that flexibility for those who want to, like Devin wrote in the chat, do all as an option. So thank you all, and I'll stop sharing and we'll go ahead and move forward. Yes, thank you, Catherine, TSEP, and Rural MPDG. That's fantastic. So let's go ahead and move forward here with advanced dialogue with funding agencies. So from my experience, I really encourage you to reach out to the funding agencies ahead of the calls for projects. Oftentimes, you can get some information while the call for projects is active, but you will get a whole lot more in advance. And for those that are doing the SB1 grants this year, either you're doing local partnership program or TSEP, solutions for congested corridors. Now is the time, if you haven't already, to meet with the CTC staff. I was just told earlier this week that once the commission of the California Transportation Commission approves the guidelines, which will happen in August, that they will no longer be taking, meetings to discuss projects and programs. What we've found and why it's so helpful is it's really going to help you to position for grant success by selling your project. Really get you that opportunity to bring some awareness. You can describe the benefits. You can gain input from these agencies in advance. And then lastly, it provides you the time to pivot. right? And how to better align a project with program goals. Oh, first here is, selling the project, right? When you get in there and you get a chance to meet with the funding agencies, you want to get into your project and put it, really highlight those great benefits that the projects are going to provide to the community and the transportation system. It'll describe the background of the project. How did that project get identified, right? Is it part of a longer term plan? Paul had talked about the Placer Sacramento Gateway plan. Was it a part of a plan like that, or was it linked to maybe the state rail plan or something like that, right? There's other, planning documents that identify these projects, and you can bring that forward to demonstrate, hey, this isn't just a fly-by-night project that came up. We've really been thinking about it and identified it. You go into the project limits and the scope, right? Paul talked a lot yesterday about project descriptions and really being clear with what your project limits are. So that way there's no guessing what's included and what's not included, and what are all those elements that your project is going to build. And then the purpose and need, right? So one thing with environmental documents is often there is the purpose and need statement. So that does a great job of even just clearly stating why this project, why do we need it? What's the issue that it's trying to address in the transportation network? Show existing site photos, help to paint that picture of just the deficiency in the existing system that you're looking to resolve. And then if you have engineered drawings or renderings or anything like that you can share to help further paint the picture of your project. Now, and here on the screen is an example of a bundled project that we in the agencies met with the California Transportation Commission to discuss. So this project is going to improve a couple of interchanges and improve multimodal access over the interchange, but it's also going to upgrade light rail stations to accommodate low floor light rail vehicles. And so we came in and we were able to use this location map as one of the graphics saying, hey, here is where the project is within Sacramento County. It touches these communities. And here's, for the interchange enhancements, here they are specifically in the transportation system. And then look, there's also 2 light rail stations that are right next to these interchanges, and the improvements that, they work symbiotically together to help to not just reduce congestion, but also promote a mode shift to transit. I just started talking a little bit about describing the project benefits, and that is super important. And you got to know and have an idea of what those program goals are. And that can be, you can get that information either from a previous call for projects on the granting agency website. Oftentimes there's, information about what the program is intended to do. You can base it off presentations and hearings about the grant programs and the grant requirements, right? Kind of have that information and then describe how your project aligns with those goals. We've spent a lot of time talking about disadvantaged communities or underserved communities, equity priority communities, right? Many kind of different names to this and definitions for these groups. And how does your project support those? Is it located immediately within a disadvantaged community? Does it provide mobility benefits to members of those communities? Does it reduce collisions? And does it address a safety need out there, right? And having that understanding of just how many crashes are going to be reduced by your project. Is there a vehicle miles traveled reduction, right? Can you demonstrate it with technical data, or, at least describing it in that you're supporting that mode shift, even if you don't have that hard data to back it up. The greenhouse gas emissions reductions, that's really important. Improved truck throughput. So if you're going after a trade corridor enhancement program application, it really is about a couple of items, one being the truck throughput and reduced travel times for trucks specifically, but then also the same for freight trains as well. And then just lastly, as an example, is does it increase transit ridership, right? Are you able to demonstrate that through these improvements, more individuals are going to be taking this bus system, or are they going to be more individuals taking the light rail or commuter rail? And then providing that information in a really easy to understand format. Just make it clear that while you're presenting and talking about it to the funding agencies, they don't have any questions about how you're displaying the information, whether you're going to put that in a table or just bullets. Either way, just something that's really clear and quick, easy for individual to comprehend. And request their input. There's one thing we've learned is that there's always room for improvement. There's ways that the project and the grant applications can be better, right? It doesn't matter how great I think I've done on a project and don't think there's room for improvement. I understand that, yes, there's always some room for improvement and ways to get better. So we're always looking for that feedback that agencies can provide. They also have great ideas on how to improve your application. I was on a call earlier this week with a funding agency, and they recommended that, maybe this agency wants to look at ways to incorporate near zero or zero emission vehicle purchases or charging equipment within the application. Also ask just what are reviewers going to be looking for, right? Each individual may be kind of looking for something slightly unique or different within the applications based on the guidelines, right? Individuals, even with the guidelines, you're going to have your own kind of they could have their own interpretation, and it's good to get that in advance. And like I said before, just ask for those areas of improvement when you get them. And I want to provide here a quick case study, and I know the agency just happens to be on the call. So down in Orange County, there is the OC Loop segments OPQ. And so the Orange County did have meetings with the California Transportation Commission about the active transportation program and the project specifically. And so CTC staff recommended that the agency submit this total 2.7 mile bikeway as one singular application, but then also submit an application for one of the segments. And so there ended up being two applications, right, that covered portions of this project, and it ended up being a very successful approach with segment O, the one that was individually submitted, receiving the highest score in Orange County at a 91 and securing 4.6 million in ATP funding, right? So just as that example of, hey, if you ask for input and listen to what the funding agencies can provide, it does, or it can turn into success for you and your applications and your agency. And, consider revisions, right? So take back what you've heard from the funding agencies, check that information against the program guidelines, right? What you heard, was that already in the guidelines, or was that even like a little extra bit of information that the funding agency was willing to share? And then identify those refinements that are needed, right? And start putting those into play, whether that's going to be like I shared before, maybe, you know, you want to add something to a project to increase its competitiveness. And then you have that time for refinement, or yeah, well, you should maybe look at getting support from X agency or X community-based organization, right? And it gives you that chance to pivot to improve your chances of securing funding. And what I've also have learned, and Paul talked about this just briefly earlier today, was that funding agencies are concerned with schedules and really want to verify that funds are allocated prior to the deadlines, right? So when you're developing your project schedule and you're aware of when those fiscal year dates are that you're requesting funds, that you provide sufficient space between when that very last date that you can request funds are in that fiscal year, that you provide some buffer before that, right? So if you're going after funds from any of the SB1 programs, right, and it's, you know, you want to ask for funds in 24, you know, fiscal years 24, 25, well, don't wait and put your construction like your construction allocation date as June 2025, like the very last date that you could possibly ask for. You know, they want to see that you're got scheduled buffer room before you would come in, and, you know, you give room before the end of that cycle of when you would be requesting funds. And I want to provide a case study because I think this went fairly well. This is for the 3rd Street grade separation in the city of Riverside. We're working with the agency to prepare a trade corridor enhancement program application. And we went in and had an office meeting with the California Transportation Commission staff. And what we wanted to do was to increase the awareness of the project and understand how we can enhance the application to meet the program goals, right? To really, let's get us a win and get this project implemented. We laid out clearly what the project costs are and what the funding program request would be, as well as a detailed project schedule of those key milestone dates of, you know, when was the environmental completed? When is final design going to be completed? When is all the right-of-way going to be acquired? And lastly, you know, when are we planning to go in for that CTC allocation and when we're going to begin construction? And because I was aware that of what the CTC, or the California Transportation Commission, was concerned with regarding schedule and allocation dates, I was able to work with the city early on to say, all right, well, let's make sure with our project schedule, we're going to fall within the CTC, you know, prior to the very last date we could request funds. And so that's what our project here demonstrated and what we told the funding agency staff. We laid out exactly how the project meets the program goals, right? We demonstrated that this project wasn't going to increase vehicle miles traveled, that it supports a freight mode shift from trucks to trains. And then we talked about the increased truck throughput and truck speeds, as well as the air quality benefits. And the project, as we'll see in a couple more slides, is that it is in some of the most highly impacted census tracts in Riverside and in Southern California, and just how important it was for the community to have this air quality benefit. And we talked about how the project meets policies, right? Well, I'm going to talk at the end of today about different state and federal funding policies. And one of those, and Paul brought it up briefly yesterday, is the California the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI, and there are several goals and strategies within CAPTI. And what we did here is just highlighted exactly how this project supports those strategies and made it clear, because we knew going in from reading and just following the guidelines and following the public meetings and hearings that this was going to be really important to the success of the project, is having that alignment with this policy with CAPTI. And next here, I'll just take a quick breather, and then we're going to jump into the next module here, which is communication as storytelling. But I want to provide a moment if anybody has any questions or anything they want to share about their own experiences meeting with funding agencies. Okay, communication as storytelling. Oh, Jeff, great point. Try to get a score sheet if possible. Yes, the active transportation program does a good job of making that scoring rubric public, but within a debrief, which I should say that's just as important as that upfront conversation, is getting the debrief from the agency, where then you could get a score sheet, right? And see exactly how you scored and what the reviewers thought of your project. And maybe, then it'll help to highlight what if you didn't receive funding this time, how to enhance your application going forward, or just in general, how to benefit the next application that you submit. This communication as storytelling is really the culmination of selecting the right program, talking to funding agencies, and then again, we'll talk later about policies, is really understanding those funding those policies at the state and federal level, and how you can use effective language to help sell the project, right? How to go through and highlight your project benefits, utilize existing or maybe project specific data, and how to incorporate that to really enhance your narratives. Because I've found that if we make claims in a grant application, it's so much stronger if we're able to back it up with data and not just a qualitative statement. And that information, like I said, it may be project specific data, or maybe it's from a planning document that's been prepared by your regional agency or your local agencies just recently or in the past. And then always making that tie back to the project benefits, right? And how it's, those benefits meet the goals of the program. But first, telling your project story. So you want to provide that project history and background. Often within grant programs in your applications, you get the chance to paint the picture of why this project was needed. And you can describe the existing transportation challenges that are featured. Is it a safety issue? And maybe there's an intersection where you have a higher number of collisions involving bicyclists and pedestrians. Maybe it's multimodal access, right? Where you have a project that it is really creating where the existing transportation system creates a barrier to multimodal access. Right, that's one of the things I think that active transportation program does pretty well, is it lets you to tell the story of why there's a barrier and how does that impact bicyclists and pedestrians. Is it a goods movement issue, right? Is your area, if you're within maybe the Inland Empire or San Joaquin County, where your jurisdiction is building a lot of tilt ups, right? You have big industrial areas coming in, or light industrial with fulfillment centers and distribution centers, and you have a goods movement issue, and you need to help trucks and trains pass through an area more efficiently. Maybe it's air quality, right? Like I just mentioned with the city of Riverside, where these census tracts around the project had really high Calum virus screen scores, and particularly around air quality impacts. And then lastly, is it vehicle congestion? Maybe there's, you need some interchange modifications, right? That could help cars and trucks enter and exit the freeway more efficiently. You want to highlight the project benefits and how they specifically address those challenges. And it doesn't, I think in this instance, more like some of the federal grants, if anybody has submitted those to USDOT, where you present this transportation challenge, but then you have to say how the project addresses it, right? And then you go into more detail later in the application about the details of exactly how and why you're able to benefit those, address those challenges, right? So really just laying out succinctly kind of in the front of applications how your project does that. And then again, as Paul talked about earlier, is that community and stakeholder support, and demonstrating that the community is behind your project, or you've got strong stakeholder support. And we're going to lay out a couple of examples here. I know it's a lot of text, but I'll just talk briefly through what we were doing with these applications. So we have been supporting the town of Paradise with their funding efforts and their ATPs, active transportation program applications. So this is an example from a previous cycle, and those who are aware or remember that Paradise in 2018 was severely damaged by the Camp Fire. It resulted in a lot of infrastructure damage, housing and business loss, and the loss of life. It was very devastating for the community, but they're building back. And so we wanted to demonstrate in the ATP applications just how the project will support the rebuilding efforts within the community. And here bolded is that as the infrastructure was destroyed by the fire is slowly but surely being rebuilt, the community is reprioritizing existing deficiencies in the town's active transportation network, recognizing that large gaps in bikeways, lack of sidewalks, lack of connected trail networks, and poor evacuation routes, all of which existed on Skyway, their main street, making biking and walking unsafe, right? Recognizing that, hey, there's this issue, and through the campfire, as you're rebuilding, they're reprioritizing where they want to focus their efforts on how to make this connected community. Next year, this is an example from the I Street Bridge replacement project in Sacramento. It's a new bridge connecting Sacramento and West Sacramento. And we wanted to highlight just how the project supports economic development on both sides of the river. There's two specific plan areas that the project connects, one of which is the rail yards, which may be the largest, at least in California, if not the US, the largest brownfield redevelopment site. And here we just highlighted again in bold that more than 24,000 jobs will be created because of the planned redevelopment. The new bridge will support this employment center, because there's going to be all these jobs right within the redevelopment, by creating a key connection for current and future residents of these infill areas to access jobs in the downtown, right? Just drawing that connection that, hey, this project is part of this larger redevelopment effort, and that by building it, we're making these connections for individuals to get to jobs. And here's another one. This is in the city of Santa Ana for a railroad grade separation raise grant application, and demonstrating how in the past transportation facilities had impacted underserved communities within downtown Santa Ana, and how the project, how the city and the project has recognized that and wants to address those challenges. And you see highlighted here at the bottom is the safety conditions, traffic congestion, and air and noise pollution all further contribute to equity challenges that the local community disproportionately faces. So the community around the project site has high in Cal virus screen, as well as within on the federal level, it's the EJ screen, or environmental justice screen, from the US EPA. It was shown in the data that this community had high traffic congestion as well as pollution concerns, and so we recognize that and how the project will address those concerns. Data interpretation. There are so many data sources out there for that can support your grant application, and there really are so many. And I'm going to highlight just a couple examples. Maybe it's a traffic study. That traffic study could be maybe part of your general plan update, or it could be a project specific traffic study. You've already done the environmental phase of the project, you understand exactly what that traffic looks like, and you're ready to move forward. There's information within the environmental documents talk about noise or air quality issues that the project will be addressing. There's the Healthy Places Index. I found this composite website to be great, as I can pull in there quickly, how many individuals are living in poverty, are below the poverty line within a certain census tract. I can see who's, vehicle ownership rates and transit usage, right, based in these different census tracts. And I do call on that to help make cases and applications. I had mentioned the EJ screen, the environmental justice screen from USDOT. So if you are going after a grant from USDOT, I highly encourage you to use EJ screen to demonstrate your environmental justice areas, because Paul did talk yesterday about the different disadvantaged community criteria. Well, one tool to help you on your federal grants, you can use it for the state grants too, but it's a lot of repeat as Cal virus screen would be EJ screen. That's something the federal government, if you read through those notice of funding opportunities, they do say, look at EJ screen. And lastly, employment data. And you can get that through a couple of different ways, but one that we found is pretty successful is using the GIS on the map tool from the US Census Bureau. Understand what that data is demonstrating. I went through all those different, a couple of different sources and what that data is. So just understanding what your data points are telling you. And then lastly, how you can use that data to support your grant application. And again, we're going to provide some more examples to help highlight just how we have seen this done in the past. So this is a trade corridor enhancement program application for the city of Tracy at an interchange where there's a lot of need for fulfillment centers within the San Joaquin Valley. And what we have here is a project that really supports large distribution centers coming in. And we have this data from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission of where there's rentable space. So I have highlighted here below, bolded that, and a lot of other information here, right? But just highlighting that within San Joaquin County, there's approximately 81 million square feet of warehousing per square mile, right? So a high density of fulfillment centers, and this goods movement project is going to support that development pattern. Next, again, pulling from the OC loop. This is segment O ATP application. So this bikeway is a commuter bikeway, and we wanted to highlight how it's going to provide access to jobs. Well, here bolded, you can see that there are 8,873 jobs within a half mile and 32,058 jobs within 1 mile of the project corridor. The density of employment opportunities near the project promotes the Coyote Creek Bikeway as a commuter facility. All right, so Coyote Creek Bikeway is just another name for the project, OC Loop, Coyote Creek Bikeway. So we demonstrate here that yes, like workers can take the bikeway to commute to work, right? They don't have to rely on automobile access to get to work. And here's a map that actually under Paul Martin had when he was working at OCTA, had previously been prepared. That helps to demonstrate where the project is, what it connects to within the larger network, and then the number of parks and schools and residents within a half mile. And that information is all derived using GIS. So a question from Larry in the chat is, where did we get the job numbers? So when we come to the break, Larry, I'll put the link in because I can't remember if it's part of our helpful links, but it's called the On the Map tool from the US Census Bureau. It's a GIS sketch system where you draw in a boundary and it'll tell you the number of jobs within that boundary. Another example here, this is from Grant Line Road in San Joaquin County, where this roadway is being, it has really poor operations at the intersections. It connects between the I-5 freeway and Amazon and other distribution centers in Eastern Tracy. And we just wanted to highlight just how poor the roadway operations are because of the number of vehicles and trucks that are using the roadway. So Grant Line Road will operate at a level of service, LOSF, as a 2-lane roadway under no build conditions, and will improve to LOSA under the build conditions as regional traffic and trucks divert to the new roadway. So this project builds a new roadway alignment south of this community of Banta, and will help to remove trucks and local traffic from the roadway. And another example here, this is the Watt Avenue Complete Streets ATP application, where we wanted to demonstrate the community need for walking and biking facilities. And here, like I mentioned before, using the HPI or the Healthy Places Index, I draw directly from there, and we say approximately 10% of the population does not have access to a car and are reliant on walking and biking and transit travel, right? That is directly from the HPI. And we say, hey, this is the community characteristic. And by including this project, we're able to help to address that challenge by installing bike lanes and wider sidewalks and connectivity to along Watt Avenue, which is a highly traveled transit route by the local bus system. And here's just an example of that with these maps to demonstrate the density of housing around the project site, as well as the Healthy Places Index scores and the Calum virus screen scores there in the second map. You'll want to leverage existing planning documents, I think, almost as much as you can, because there is some really good information within those documents, whether it's prioritization or it's community support that's documented, etc. So these can really help to demonstrate the need for your project. It shows that your project wasn't just identified recently, right? It is a planned project that is supported by the community, and you can demonstrate too how the project fits in to the greater network through these plans. We'll go through a couple of examples of what we've seen done in the past that helps draw in planning documentation. And this again is from the I-580 International Parkway Interchange Trade Corridor Enhancement Program application. And their regional agency, SJCOG, San Joaquin Council of Governments, created a congested corridors plan so they could be eligible for SCCP, or Solutions for Congested Corridors Program funds. And this project was included within that, right? That it's part of this overall network of improvements regionally that help to improve mobility and reduce air quality, or excuse me, improve air quality. And I have bolded here, the project was eligible for inclusion in that congested corridors plan, as it is a multimodal project that includes operational and capacity improvements, right? So it helps to address the regional transportation needs. And the rest of that sentence then goes on to discuss achieving a VHT, so vehicle hours of travel reduction, increased truck throughput, reducing collisions, etc. Right? So how that project then fits in with the larger network and is part of this plan. This is from an ATP application for the Trax Abrea. This is a trail class 1 path within a former railroad right-of-way. And we wanted to demonstrate here is that there is a long history of community engagement, right? So we're able to pull and tie back to all these planning documents and community engagement efforts that were included within those and tie those into this project. And the sentence here I highlighted below states that each planning study documented the strong community support and interest in providing high quality off-street class 1 multi-use path using the old rail corridor or construction adjacent to it, right? Saying that, hey, this class 1 path is exactly what the people want. And it's shown over and over again in the engagement from these plans. And here's just a quick snapshot of some of these plans, right? There's the OC Loop plan, the 7030 plan, 4th Street, our 4th District Bikeway strategy, and then even a plan that the city of Brea had done themselves. And then we'll be going on to the next topic, which is developing compelling graphics. And Paul, I don't remember if we had a break scheduled now.
Yeah. Typically around here, let's go ahead and do that. Give
Okay.
people about 10 minutes. So it is almost 10:15, so 10 minutes at 10:25. We'll have everyone come back, and then we'll talk about graphics and letters of support following. Thanks. right, it's about 10:25, so we'll get started again. Ryan, we'll have you go through, but there is a part in this module where I'll pull up the TIMS site and show the crash data as well. Let me do a double check. Yeah, it looks like I had the screen share option today. Okay, so hopefully everyone's back. It's 10:25. We'll get started again. You've heard a variety of different topics already today. I wanted to spend some time talking about compelling graphics and use some examples and really explore that a bit. So then let's get right into it. So when we're pursuing grant applications, we really want to make sure that we've got good graphics, compelling graphics and renderings and as such that are needed. And it can vary depending on the grant application. So certain funding programs like the SB1 grants, where there's more of the storytelling and narrative language, like what Ryan was talking about, the graphics are really going to be crucial for you to convey messages. And I know I'm all about the visuals. So, sometimes you're reading hundreds of lines of text or hundreds of words of text and it can start to blur. But if I see the graphic and then I read the text, then it really helps. Certain grant applications, it's not so crucial. So there are some graphics required for the HSIP program, but it's more limited to, say, showing the crash data and design plans, that type of thing. So the example on the screen shows a simple graphic that shows a study location. But generally, we would say thereafter, you're going to have to really start to nail things and have much more compelling graphics beyond just the simple, where is my project? That can serve a purpose, but then beyond that, it's going to need to go to the next level. So go ahead, advance to the next slide. Here's an example with the city of Laguna Niguel in Southern Orange County where crash data is shown. So this is published crash data from the state where we've been able to download it and clean it up in GIS for any outliers that are outside of their jurisdiction. And then assign some sort of weighting based on crashes, the volume of crashes or severity, and provide some heat map that really shows and immediately conveys where the major roadways of concern, in this case, relative to crash data. And, in this case, it's all collisions. So involving motorists, motorcycle travel, bicycle, pedestrian, trucking, and so on, everything and anything. But with crash data, for example, you can really slice and dice it and be specific on modes or time of day, severity of injuries. So you can go to a good amount of detail, for example, on that type of thing. Ryan, previously in the prior module, there was a discussion about jobs in the vicinity, and some of the graphics that we've shown convey a lot of information about employment or housing, the density of those populations or employment. Those types of things can all be conveyed as well. And the GIS heat maps are something I really appreciate, that it just is right in your face about what am I looking at? What's the intent there? All right, so then the next graphic we show really then starts to explore a little bit more about the TIMS data. So on the screen is an example, and I'll do a screen share for myself here. At the bottom of the PDF, the PowerPoint shows the Berkeley portal for TIMS, the Transportation Injury Mapping System. So I'm gonna do the screen share now. Do you see that all right, Ryan? All right, good. It's on the right screen and everything. Okay.
Yep, you're good.
So then here we have a web portal. I'm logged in under my name. So you do need, for this website, you do need to get a login essentially. So UC Berkeley through state funding has created this online database that's GIS-based interface that shows the crash history throughout the state, published crash data that comes from our law enforcement officers, that the crash reports are sent to Sacramento and then cleaned up or input into this database. The TIMS data shows crashes that are showing injuries. There's another database that is separate that also includes property damage only crash data. So that is important, certainly if you're going after HSIP grant application, or you want to make sure that you just cover everything and anything. The TIMS data doesn't show the property damage only, but has a real nice interface. And in fact, the state of California with the active transportation program essentially guides people to use this module of the ATP maps and summary data. So on the TIMS database, they've got this defined module that you could go through. So I'm clicking on tools and then the ATP maps. There's a lot of different stuff here. You could use the first one to query on your own and play with all these different ones. So some established modules. Actually, I haven't even explored this. There's the Switter summary noted as new. So I guess I need to explore that and figure out how much that covers. And I suppose I could even donate. So think about that. So on the ATP maps, I wanted to just walk through this example in the chat. If anyone's got a jurisdiction that they want me to explore and just show the info for, then we can take a look at that. Otherwise, I'll just pick one. So, you know, we can pick maybe Calaveras. That's not great because of low number of jurisdictions. Let's go with Kern County and then call out Bakersfield. So I simply did the county and the city. Let me scroll back up. Right now it's showing crashes on the state highway, bicycle and pedestrian crashes, and the severity from fatalities all the way to a complaint of pain. It's preset for 4 years of data, but you could drag this over. For example, I just pulled this over, so 2014 all the way through 19. There are some additional years, more recent data, but those are provisional. So there's some data cleanup that's still occurring. It's not a done deal on that crash data per the state, but the preset is okay for the example today. There's a table here with the crash data, but the magic is really as you start to get into this heat map, a lot like the example that we showed on the screen. If I just simply click on an area, a box is added to the this map of the county, and I can zoom in and get closer, like where the heck are we? And you start to see the heat map, and it's showing the key, the dynamic key based on, or legend based on the volume of crashes. When I click the next button down, show community heat map, it zooms in on that location in particular. You can again see this key and the locations. I could zoom in tighter if I wanted to. Okay, so now if I have some grant application along Union in this jurisdiction, I could draw a line, and I'm gonna sort of mess this up on purpose. I'm gonna draw the line to the left really of the roadway, and then hit show project crash map. And I messed it up. It doesn't show really anything. Nothing's being populated here. In that case, just trying to get it to snap to the roadway doesn't totally work. So then I can go back and delete that. And then maybe this time I'll just simply do a box in the area that makes sense. And then I hit the button again, and then you see all this crash data showing up. So there's a volume of crashes that are occurring on this. There's a lot of severity. Frankly, this is starting to overlap a lot. So maybe I'll go back and change that and then zoom in on a tighter area. And it starts to zoom in, and you could see around the Truxton intersection what's going on. So not exactly intending to pick on Bakersfield, but certainly you can see how easy it is for us to hone in on where the highest volume of crashes are occurring in an area, in a jurisdiction. You know, I could have done the same for Fresno or Oakland or city of Santa Ana, for example. So you get the idea that, again, all this is showing. If I left click on one of these, then you get some basic information, the crash ID number, the dates, the severity. So there's some details here. I could click on the crash details button and get more info. With this crash ID, you could query that more, particularly that specific crash later in the database that's posted online. When pursuing the active transportation program grant applications, it's actually encouraged that you use this module and identify where your project area is. and then use this print button at the end. I'm skipping down to the end and be able to print, and it will print to PDF. And it creates a multi-page PDF with all the information, very similar to what we just observed. Let's see, was there a chat there? Okay, so yeah, someone's asking, how do you export the data to a table? So I'll go back to that in a second here. Here's the PDF that is good for grant applications. You can't totally sort all this, but you get the visual, and this is a nice thing to attach to a grant application to just show the volume and the data that came directly from that third-party source. Again, it shows the volume of crashes, it shows the region, all the steps I went through, the box that I drew around that intersection, and then the crashes, the visual. And again, as I scroll down, it's got the details. In this case, some bar charts about each year where the crashes happen to pedestrians or cyclists, and then a table showing the data again, listing all those. And if I go back to the prior, scroll down, there is the download crashes button that I could click on that, and it's going to create a Excel file, a CSV. Try and get Excel going. Put it on the right screen. So now all that data that we just looked at in the PDF is now shown in Excel. So you could play with this, and let me zoom in, try and get closer here for everyone. So you could start to see these dates are, for whatever reason, these are mixing 2016 and 17, but you could, or it's the process date, that's it. Here's the collision date shown on the right, and I'll highlight it in yellow. So you could say, okay, well, where are all the 2015s, and then highlight that in a color for your own benefit to be able to just start understanding what am I looking at, and maybe do a pivot table and sort this as needed to be able to see the information. Some of this data, like the collision time, is relevant, but the officer ID, I don't really care so much about that, right? So we could hide that. So if you were to print out the data, you could play with this and really clean it up. The process date is probably less critical to me and more about the collision date, for example. The jurisdiction, it's all the same jurisdiction. So you can play with all this and see it, okay? So let's get back to this. There's some other before and after. So this is an interesting before and after to be able to play with something and say, okay, well, an improvement similar to this happened in the jurisdiction. We're just going to replicate it now, that you can maybe work with the before and after module and be able to evaluate and show some sort of benefit. Okay. Any questions on any of this? It's
there's a question in the chat from Robert French about using or including Strava.
Yeah. So then let me go to that Strava heat map. So today I actually wrote into work and I used Strava just because, you know, I'm kind of a data nerd on that kind of thing. But, you know, going to work, it's not like I needed to know the route. But while cycling to work or just traveling, whether mostly cycling, people can use this mobile app called Strava, right? And it has this heat map that I have on the screen. And I'm just zooming in, for example, on Orange County, that would have the travel patterns of all the aggregate of all the users of that app throughout your jurisdiction. So you could play with all this stuff. It's different color modules like the blue or the whatever the hot was. You could focus on bike or pedestrian, even swimming. So look there, the Long Beach Harbor, there's a ton of cycling, swimming in that area. What's shown on the screen is the error message. Strava does provide enough data for you to get a little sense of it, but it's a bit of a teaser. This global heat map can be nice for you if you're traveling and you wanted to figure out where you might want to go and hike or bike or something. But if you want to zoom in at a fine grid, you got to pay Strava to get the higher level detail. And Strava can provide that, of course, for a price. So some jurisdictions have purchased that. It comes with some asterisks. So Strava is a mobile app. It's up to each person to decide when they're going to use it. If I zoom in, for example, I'm zoomed in on the Orange County area, for example. There's a lot of activity in Southern Orange County. You see a lot of the roadway network reflecting a lot of people recording their travel on that system. But in Santa Ana, it gets a little more dark in this case, just because it's showing less activity using that mobile app. So we certainly are seeing a slice of the community. It's people riding that are geeks like me and want to record their travel patterns. But for people in Northern Orange County, where there's a higher volume of underserved or disadvantaged community members, we're not really seeing people turn on Strava for their travel via bike for purpose to work. So it's not exactly covering everyone. This is not just pinging your phone data. It's someone actively turning on the app. So you have to be judicious about when you're going to use something like Strava. It still can provide some benefit. If I wanted to zoom in on an area where there is activity, I could say, look, people are avoiding this route or people are traveling on this route more than you realize. And if you purchase the data, you can at least get some volume of people traveling on that route and then make some assumptions. Well, do we think this covers 5% of people on the roadway on that path or travel that road, or 10%? And then you can multiply up from there. So we've done that a few times to try and come up with something. So Strava is just another good data source. There's other big data sources out there as well that can provide similar information in different ways, but it's typically going to come with some sort of cost implication. Okay, hopefully that helps. Let's get back to the slide deck then. So I think I'm good. I'll stop sharing. And Ryan, if you could do the PowerPoint again. Got the comment to provide the links. Yeah, so the Strava heat map is not in our handout, but definitely the TIMS crash data and Switter's is in the crash data online. So both of those require a login. There's no cost to the login, but you just have to, in advance, come up with something. So I think you see Ryan and I use examples from some of our favorite clients and cities that have been doing a lot of stuff. Here's an example from City of Santa Ana on a study where they did essentially their Vision Zero document, the Safe Mobility Santa Ana plan, which is now actually 6 years old. But in this case, we advanced from that example that I showed where it was the simple project location map to a map or a fact sheet that was prepared that really starts to lay out what are the solutions being envisioned on this roadway on First Street. So you get the line work. This is not even an aerial, just kind of the network map showing the stretch and the various icons, identifying the types of solutions or countermeasures that are being employed. There's a rough cost estimate and then the benefit cost ratio prepared cross-section graphic. So this is much easier to then absorb for anyone reviewing the grant application to get a sense of what the roadway network looks like, what are the changes occurring here. This shows the after cross-section. You may also include a before. Ryan, I think, trying to remember if our examples show some more before, after. Why don't you proceed to the next? No, they don't, but I think the group has got a sense of that. Here's another example. We talked about the tracks at Brea. It overlaps with the OC Loop project. So our team has been highly involved in a lot of the gap closures on the loop. And in this case, helping the city of Brea convey to the grant funding agency that, hey, we've got some major barriers, whether it's the actual creek, this flood channel, Brea Canyon flood channel, or major roadways that don't have shoulders or bikeways. And then the industrial land use and commercial land use pattern in the area that doesn't have other roadways that you can navigate through to avoid busy roadways. So in this case, really showing that the tracks at Brea or this OC Loop segment is the only mechanism to really connect through in that area if you're traveling east-west between La Habra and Brea, to be able to close the gap and build that off-street trail. Okay. I think the next slide. Yeah, so the next one is then getting away from these plan view graphics and more opportunities to present renderings and cross sections. Here, a oblique rendering of a concept. This is that project in Santa Cruz with a new class 1 trail next to the railroad, and illustrating what are we going to do with this area that has actually a good view of the ocean in that location. How do we integrate with the adjacent roadway and the parking lot, and an opportunity for some sort of overlook. So this graphic is not always required. This takes someone with real graphics capabilities to put it together. But sometimes this might help with conveying the message also to the community in workshops, or getting some executive level person or elected official to get excited about the project to really understand it more than just the black and white engineering design plans, and requiring someone to add color to it, right? To visualize what it looks like. Here our team has done that for the concept. Okay. And then the next one shows some cross sections. So there are available low cost available options for developing cross sections. This is from our graphics team, but Street Mix is a good example where agencies can use an online free tool to create cross sections that show a lot of these concepts, a lot of the images that are here. There's some constraints, but Street Mix usually is going to help you in a pinch and be able to convey the message. Here we show graphics from Northern California and various things like a bridle path, and showing where the right of way is and what the change to the roadway might look like. Or the graphic on the bottom is in the town of Paradise, where we were talking a lot about the off-street class 1 network as providing dual function, daily needs for bicycle and pedestrian travel, as well as potential emergency responder travel, and really conveying how with that constrained roadway network and an emergency evacuation, the roadways are just going to be jammed with people trying to evacuate quickly, and you might be able to use that class 1 network for ingress of emergency responders. Okay. Any questions on any of this as I'm breezing through? We've shown various graphics that our team has prepared or can be prepared for different grant applications, the rendering and the cross sections, but everyone can afford going and taking photos, right? And this is a good example here where you can tell a story around this one photograph about the needs of people accessing transit, whether it's shade and shelter, a comfortable place to sit, the width of the sidewalk, the need for a wider sidewalk in these areas where there's high transit usage, all the green space behind that is frankly kind of trampled by people standing off the curb face away from car traffic, feeling more comfortable further away, or just the volume of people. The need for a wider sidewalk if I'm approaching that in a wheelchair, or pushing a stroller, or even rolling, some sort of cart, that this is going to be tough to navigate. And this is in good weather. So what about in poor or inclement weather? So think about how you can get photographs that are going to align with your narrative and telling that story about what the needs are for the community. And that sometimes might mean that you're out there at 7 a.m., 8 a.m. or whatever, looking for students traveling to school, or the congestion around a school, or how busy a trail or a path is, or a place, because people are using it for exercise, or traveling to and from work. It might mean something at night accordingly. So really time of day, day of week would be relevant, in getting those photos at various times to demonstrate what the needs are and how your solution is going to address that. So I'm a big fan of getting those photos, including those in grant applications. Next. With that, we wanted to go to an interactive poll. Which ones have been the hardest for you to compile or convey? I've shown various examples of different things like the barriers map. We talked about mapping crash data. What has been the difficult one on your end to put graphics and images together when you've been working on grant applications in the past? All right, seeing quite a mix. So there's 6 options, essentially 5. 6 is the other. So it's quite a spread. There's not just one or the other. So we're seeing in these results, you see it now, it's almost split a quarter for each of those 4 main ones. The mapping of disadvantaged community areas, mapping of crashes, mapping and illustrating the project barriers, as well as how the project solution is graphically going to address whatever that need is. So a little bit of everything, not one or the other. Hopefully some of the stuff you've seen with showing crash data and the resources, online resources for disadvantaged community mapping, hopefully that can help with those first 2. And then you're going to make your money on figuring out how to develop graphics and maps that address the barriers and conveying how your solutions are really going to address the project. So any comments or suggestions or anything in the chat? Anyone have suggestions on other, we did an awesome map by doing X or anything like that? Certainly we're available to answer questions, and then otherwise we could keep rolling then. So the next module that we have is to be able to talk about letters of support. So let me type that. So positioning for letters of support. So many grant applications are asking for letters of support. And this is one of these critical path things that I suggest we look very early when we're asked to help an agency with a grant application to find out, do we need to put in letters if we've only heard that we're going to work on the grant application, you know, a few weeks before the grant application is due? Do we have the information that we can start asking for letters of support, and can we get that out and avoid the last minute requests, right? So really this is a long lead time, because all these other things, writing narratives, graphics, and data, and other attachments, you can probably control, but you can only nag someone so much for a letter of support. So you've got to be real nice about it, and then provide enough time so that you can say, okay, can you get it to me by this date? And it's a good week before the grant is actually due, so you've got time for some follow-up if needed. We encourage everyone to really look carefully about that. And often when I've asked for letters of support, usually whoever I'm asking, they just need to know, give me a paragraph. What is the project description? How much money are you asking for? And where the heck is this thing? So hopefully you can narrow in on those, enough of an abstract about the project and that simple project location map, that you don't need all of your grant application. You just need enough to be able to put it together. And not every time do you need to come up with a customized letter, a template, but many people really appreciate it. It just makes it easier for anyone that you're asking for that letter of support to facilitate it. So on the right, we have the example. This is the letter of support for that Tracks at Brea project, asking the CTC for grant funding. And it was, in this case, customized for the Orange County Transportation Authority. That agency prefers to identify how the project aligns with the agency published documents. So we knew that and put that together. However, some other ones might not always need to do that. I think on the next page, we see examples for the same project. Again, this is Tracks at Brea, but they look different. So the one on the left is from the local health medical center. So the team at St. Jude's has been great on providing support because of the nexus with physical activity and public health. So same project, but a very different letter, or different enough letter. It's more of a simple template identifying what the project is and how it lines up with the mission for the medical center. And then the image on the right is that final outcome of the letter that was received from OCTA on their letterhead. I have gotten lately some letters of support that don't end up on letterhead. And we're always kind of on a fine line of how much do we want to nag someone, like, hey, please print this again and do it on your letterhead and scan it and send it to me. But usually I'm asking a police officer or, you know, the sheriff or the chief or a school principal, and they've already gone out of their way typically to do something that's usually not their typical. So I kind of ease up on how much I want to push my luck, frankly, and at least get something and okay with something without the letterhead and the logo, but it's always preferred. It's just so much easier to quickly scroll through letters of support and see those logos. Before I keep going, there was a question or comment. Chanda, let's see, Canva. Oh, interesting. So Chanda pointed out Canva is a tool for flyers and graphics. So I got to take a look at that. I'm not as familiar with that one, but that's great. And then, yeah, so a lot of the graphics that you've seen that we prepared are a mixture of things where someone is using GIS data, like the crash heat map, for example, pulling all that GIS data onto our local system and our network, and then exporting the key information from GIS into Adobe Illustrator. The Adobe suite is really, I think, the go-to for creating a lot of quality graphics. There's various things out there, but those would be the ones to look for. So maybe part of it is getting an intern that knows those things and making sure they're available, and thinking about those skill sets when you're hiring staff going forward. All right, then we'll keep going. So then we talk about letters of support in general. I want to talk a little bit also about Caltrans. Ryan pointed out Caltrans does have a specific letter of support that they've identified for federal grant programs. That's identified here on the screen. And then the Caltrans also has an intake form, a specific form relative to consistency with the CAPTI goals. Ryan, is there more that you want to add to that?
No, that's really good. Yeah, there's the form that you can get that from your local district planning division. And in this instance, it's on the screen. It's from District 12 Planning, where we were submitting a grant application. We reached out directly to them saying, hey, we want to ask the state for a letter of support. And we went through and got that from them after filling out the intake form that included, like Paul mentioned, the CAPTI information and really helping to sell the project and how it aligns with state goals. So it's something that if you're going after a US DOT federal discretionary grant and you want to get a letter of support from Caltrans to bake in enough time to do that coordination.
Yeah. Excellent. So what I've been talking about is some of the logistics, coming up with a template letter, how to customize it if needed, what information you need. But what I want to end on with the discussion of letters of support in the subsequent slides is really, how do you build up your relationship with partners so that when you need their help, you know who the person is? How do you get that point of contact so you've got a good sense? Okay, here are the 10 groups that we can interact with. I mentioned the St. Jude's, for example, and Tracy and Barry at the team over there that we've built a rapport with over time. And some of that is really just some legwork to build those relationships in advance. Ryan, will you go to the next slide? So here we talk about, not just local agencies, but thinking about your community-based organizations. What are their goals and what's the overlap? So we see images on the bottom left is a CBO focus on active transportation, and just sometimes it means you're attending those meetings. You're not totally sure what the outcome is, but part of it might be networking or understanding, listening and really finding out, what is that CBO focused on and how does it line up with your interests? In the bottom right is a Chamber of Commerce type meeting in a downtown area, and you get a mixture of different people and business owners all participating. So again, this is Paul Martin photo library of just sitting at different meetings and thinking, okay, is this a group that I need to go to and attend? I'm not totally sure what the outcome is, but I want to go and hear about what they're doing and build those relationships and see how you can help. And sometimes just being a fan or a supporter goes a long way. And sometimes it does mean that you might do things outside of your typical work hours, outside at the 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. The next slide shows a circumstance of going on a Sunday bike ride. So here the image is actually a council member from Costa Mesa that hosts monthly bike rides, and the active transportation coordinator at the city is in the photo there with the bicycle shirt. So this is a circumstance where, hey, going to this is not dreadful. Frankly, it's an opportunity for me to get out and ride and get some exercise. So whether it's a walk, a ride, a community meeting, some sort of other event that's going on, that I'd encourage staff that are working on those grant applications to just build up those relationships and think widely about who these stakeholders are that you might in the future need to ask for a letter of support. So we've got our list of different groups. So it might be community-based organizations or nonprofits. Of course, you got your regional agencies, including Caltrans, adjacent jurisdictions. Maybe there's elected officials that are very supportive of the topic, and residents. So it's a broad reach, but don't forget as well about these other groups, schools and public health, organizations focused on public safety that may not be primarily transportation focused groups. So with that, I want to end with a poll. Really, are you on a first name basis with some community-based organization staff within your community? Yes. Yes, we collaborate often. Yes, but it's not great. And then no. And then certainly if anyone, so I put in this one, yes, but it's a strained relationship. And I wanted to talk about that a bit. So among the people that responded, we're seeing about half are saying, yes, we collaborate often, 40% saying no. So I encourage the 40% that said no to start building up that network and really understand the groups. It's not like you need to be best friends and go out for drinks or lunch on a regular basis, but just knowing who the people are and having those points of contact can be helpful. And if anyone in the chat wants to talk about, only a few of you said yes, but it's a strained relationship. Why is it strained, right? And I think as a public agency staff person, my personal experience has certainly been that it's always a bit tricky. We have a mixture of people that are interested in being a community, an advocate, essentially, a part of a community-based organization. And sometimes that feels like you should be grassroots and you should be watching the agency or trying to have a gotcha moment with your agency staff. So hopefully that's not the case, but the reality is we see a lot of that. I had a buddy recently he gave a speech and kind of got pressed in the Q&A by an advocate in front of the whole crowd, but then after was doing a one-on-one and said, thanks for all you're doing. It's been great. And in that moment as an agency staff person, you're like, man, you just were like holding my feet to the fire in front of everyone. But then after, it's like we're best friends. Like, what's going on? I don't know that people in the community that aren't in the business, they may not realize that they do that, or people get kind of emotionally charged. So anything like things like that happen. It's a mixture. So certainly I think everyone's going to have a bit of thick skin, but hopefully those strained relationships can still yield some sort of benefit and a mutual understanding. All right, any questions or comments on any of that before we move on? Any other war stories we should hear about working with advocates or CBOs? All right, so we're at 11:05. How are we doing, Ryan? I think,
I think
Ryan, you have a few more modules to go through.
I have one more module.
One more.
This is the end. Yeah, last module, everyone. And this is on political trends and evolving policies. So we've talked a little bit about this, kind of sprinkled throughout yesterday and today. And I'm going to do a little more of a dive into those items and scratch the surface of them, right? And there's definitely more to learn about each one of these, but I'm going to provide some of the basic information that can help you moving forward. So with political trends and policies, it's really important to understand how these policies impact funding decisions. If you are pursuing an SB1 grant this year, there's written into those grant applications discussion of these policies, right? Or within USDOT, there's some of these policies in there as well. What's great is that California has actually been on the leading edge of these policies, where we've been addressing them for a while now, and they are now starting to make their way into the federal system as well. So we really have a nice overlap of policies and not conflicting policies. And then here's just a list on the screen of some of those that we're going to talk about today. And then, understanding these policies will really help you to position your grants for award, right? When I gave that example of the City of Riverside meeting for the grade separation, I was able to tie in these policies to why the project is a good fit for the program. Well, the big one that we talk a lot about now in transportation funding is CAPTI, or the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. It was adopted last March, so March 2021. And really the intent here with the plan is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, or GHG, in the transportation sector. And that policy then built upon two recent executive orders by Governor Newsom that are here listed below regarding transportation and climate. Within CAPTI, there are numerous guiding principles and then strategies, and we'll go through those, and I'll just briefly touch on them, and it'll help you to understand, where the funding policy decisions are being made now, and what sort of projects are going to be most successful here within, not just the most recent funding cycles, but also those moving forward. So the first one being, building towards an integrated statewide rail and transit network, right? So if you have a project that happens to involve a rail or commuter rail or statewide transit, how your project ties in to that. Investments in ZEV, so zero emission vehicle infrastructure for all types. Investing in networks of safe and accessible bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, right? Active transportation facilities are really important for the state, and that's a key policy. And when money is being put towards investing in that infrastructure, strengthening our commitment to social and racial equity by reducing our public health and economic harms, and maximizing community benefits, especially those in disproportionately impacted communities, right? This is often referred to as equity, right? Making sure that your project is providing benefits to residents living in low income or underserved communities. Making safe safety improvements to reduce fatalities and severe injuries of all users towards zero. So a statewide push towards Vision Zero, we talked about yesterday. Promoting projects that do not significantly increase passenger vehicle travel. Though the state is pushing towards and recommending, and Paul talked about this earlier, projects that do not increase vehicle miles traveled, do not provide for additional lane capacity. Assessing physical climate risk, right? So being able to have climate resiliency of the transportation system, promoting compact infill development, and protecting from displacement, right? So supporting projects that are building near or in open, like within available land within existing communities, particularly near transit, TODs, transit-oriented development, as well as avoiding displacements, right? And we'll go a little bit further into displacement in the next couple slides. And then the last two policies, developing a zero emission freight transportation system. That is important at the state policy level, and there's discussions about that at the California Transportation Commission of how we as a state can influence zero emission freight transportation systems. And then lastly, protecting the natural and working lands, right? Protecting our natural environments as well as our agricultural lands. And I just want to highlight quickly here, there's a whole lot more strategies within the climate action plan for transportation infrastructure, but I just want to highlight a couple of these that I have seen recently that have become very important. If you have your regional agency is going to go after a solutions for congested corridors program. And this is right where Paul talked about bundling, and I've kind of hinted at project bundling as well for grant applications, is that it enables travelers to opt out of congestion, right? So if you have a project as the local jurisdiction that, or maybe as the transit agency that can help travelers opt out of congestion, meaning not drive in their single occupancy vehicles along the highway, then I highly encourage you to talk to that regional transportation agency about how you can bundle together. Another here, you can see that S 2.4, increase funding to the active transportation program. So I haven't seen what's exactly in the state budget that just got passed, but I know there had been previous discussions about increasing funding towards the active transportation program. So that's something of interest to me. Is the last couple times we've had the budget surplus, there's been discussions about providing an influx in ATP funding. And then lastly, just to highlight S 3.4, develop and utilize equity index to assist in evaluation or prioritization of Caltrans projects. So even at the state level, Caltrans will be looking, or the CTC wants to develop a, not the CTC, excuse me, but the state wants to develop a plan and process for ensuring that equity is considered in Caltrans projects as well. Next is, we'll talk about the California Transportation Plan 2050. This is the statewide transportation plan. It was completed in 2021, and it provides a framework for transportation decisions across the state, and it addresses a variety of transportation needs. And there are a set of goals within the CTP, or the California Transportation Plan 2050, that you'll see some of these overlapped with CAPTI. So the CTP 2050 focuses on safety of the transportation system, reducing climate impacts, really reducing greenhouse gas emissions, providing equity and investment within low income and disadvantaged communities, enhancing accessibility, improving public health and the quality of life, supporting the vibrant economy, reducing environmental impacts, and then lastly, the infrastructure and the state of good repair. Oh, thank you. Marianne Hernandez dropped in the chat that yesterday at the CTC, they announced $1 billion being added to the ATP. That's what I was alluding to. That was potentially within the state budget, and was curious of what was going to get passed yesterday. So thank you. I'll have to do some research on my own to see just exactly what has come through. And the 2050 CTP also has a list of recommendations on improvements. And just to highlight a few of these, it's advanced transportation equity. They're on number 4. Number 5, enhanced transportation system resiliency, right? Our ability within the transportation network to adapt to climate change. And then lastly, we'll focus on number 11. That's encourage efficient land use. And that goes around infill developments, primarily in supporting that development versus greenfield development areas. So I mentioned just a little bit ago about displacement and gentrification. In that, if you worked on an ATP application recently, there were questions around displacement and also the pro-housing designation, which that is, I don't have all the background on pro-housing and how how your agency can accomplish it, but that is a designation that is becoming important within the SB1 funding realm that I would encourage your agency to look into getting that designation, because it will help you to be able to secure additional grant funds at the state level. With gentrification and displacement, the state and the federal government are focused to limit grant application or grant funding on projects that will result in or contribute to gentrification or displacement. And we want to avoid displacing people, particularly those experiencing homelessness, right? If you did a Clean California grant late last year, earlier this year, a big portion of that program, and in fact, if you did displace people experiencing homelessness, you were ineligible for the Clean California grant. So that's, there's a big tie within the state between housing, displacement, and transportation. And then you can see here attached to the screen was that the CTC has developed a transportation equity supplement guide to help with when you're developing your grant applications to address transportation equity. And I did want to provide a quick example here of fresh, very recent grant application where we did a really good job, I feel, about addressing displacement and using a new tool called the Urban Displacement Project. And that link is provided within the handout. So this project is called the Envision Broadway in Oak Park. So it is a 1 mile complete street corridor project within the Oak Park neighborhood in Sacramento. So that is in historically African-American community that has experienced wide levels of disinvestment in the past, which the city is working hand in hand with community-based organizations to revitalize the area and support multimodal travel and enhance safety. And one of the concerns from the community is gentrification and displacement. So here we talk about using the Urban Displacement Project, this online tool, to describe gentrification and then how the city has worked to reduce that concern by the community. So I've highlighted a couple bits here of the narrative where Oak Park is a historically disadvantaged neighborhood, which the Urban Displacement Project has identified as experiencing early ongoing gentrification, and displacement is a concern with its residents. And then the last highlight here is, while gentrification is a concern, the improvements identified by the community will rebalance public streets to meet the mobility needs of the disadvantaged residents in the neighborhood, including the unhoused at a large new shelter near Alhambra Boulevard. So within the project limits, there was a navigation center that was just built for those experiencing homelessness. And it was important to notice, discuss that within the grant application, that the improvements aren't going to impact negatively impact individuals that are using that navigation center. Next here, we're going to jump into the federal policies, and the first being this executive order from President Biden, 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. So this is truly around reducing greenhouse gas emissions and promoting zero emission vehicles, really understanding climate impacts on transportation infrastructure and providing for resiliency, supporting union jobs, right? That's those who are following the politics closely, is that the current president is very supportive of unions. So we start to see union jobs and support for those in the construction industry coming up within notices of funding opportunity at the federal level, protecting public health and reducing impacts on the environment. And here I just highlighted that if your agency has a climate action plan, or maybe your region has a climate action plan, to really draw on that in your pursuit of federal discretionary grants and reviewing the environmental justice impacts, right? I talked about the EJ Screen tool. And then also implementing sustainable infrastructure and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, right? The greenhouse gas emissions reduction could be through reducing vehicle miles traveled or improving operational efficiency of the transportation system. But then also there's sustainable infrastructure, right? Are you using innovative pavement technologies or cool pavement, planting of trees and shrubs and different landscape features to help to reduce the heat island effect? And here's as a screenshot from a EJ screen that was performed for the Santa Ana grade separation project. And like I said, we wanted to show here is that our project supports that previous executive order 14008. And here within EJ Screen, and we highlight a couple of key items, exactly how the neighborhoods around the project are experiencing higher levels of diesel particulate matter emissions, or PM 2.5, particulate matter 2.5 emissions, as well as higher levels of traffic compared to other neighborhoods within the state and the nation, and then highlighting exactly how this project addresses those concerns, how it reduces traffic, or how it reduces greenhouse gas emissions to create a better environment for the residents around the project site. Next is Executive Order 13985, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. This executive order is around advancing equity and for all, including historically disadvantaged communities in areas of persistent poverty. Paul talked about those briefly yesterday as two definitions at the federal level for disadvantaged communities. And one thing I'd like to note is that these are different definitions than the state level. And so census tract may not be identified within Cal Screen as a disadvantaged community. However, when you look at the federal definition for historically disadvantaged communities, it may qualify. So do pay attention to that difference, because your community or where the project is located could be in one of these federally designated disadvantaged communities definitions. Also, this executive order is about addressing barriers to opportunity impacting underserved communities and allocating resources to address those inequities. And here is an example. Again, this is from our favorite Highway 1 corridor in Santa Cruz County, where we were proposing a grant to install bus on shoulder improvements on Route 1, which would improve transit efficiency between Watsonville, where there's a large group of, or where there's many disadvantaged, historically disadvantaged community census tracts, and Santa Cruz, where there's jobs. And so drawing that tie here between the two was the intent here, demonstrating that while our project wasn't located directly within those, it does, within those identified census tracts, it does support them. Here, another is the Justice 40 initiative, which supports our previous executive order we talked about, 14008. And so the federal government here, what they're declaring is they're going to allocate 40% of relevant federal investments to disadvantaged communities. That is their goal that they're aiming for, that they want to address the environmental justice issues that are experienced by community members. And then they give a broad list of definitions that could be described as disadvantaged communities. Of course, there's those that we're familiar with in California around income and poverty and environmental burdens, environmental stressors, right? Because those are our Cal Screen and then our median household income. But there's also, racial and ethnic residential segregation or linguistic isolation, high housing and high transportation cost burdens, or access to healthcare, right? There's all these different definitions that are just good to keep your eye on, right? So if you're going after these federal grants, federal discretionary grants, you can make that tie to these different definitions to help support your grant application's case. FHWA has also developed the Safe Systems approach. Those of you who mentioned that you were going after a Safe Streets and Roads for All program have seen this, Safe Streets and Roads for All grant application. You have seen this before. It's been mentioned in the different presentations about the funding program. And so it's an overall or overarching system approach to addressing safety on our roadway systems to accommodate for human mistakes and keeping impacts on individuals on their bodies, right, at tolerable levels. And so this whole approach here is around addressing that both from the users themselves to vehicles to post-crash care, as well as the physical infrastructure with reducing speeds and reducing instances of speeding and enhancing roadway safety. The principles from the FHWA program are that, you know, they're working towards zero deaths, again, the Vision Zero goals, that humans do make mistakes and that we are vulnerable, and that the roadway safety is a shared responsibility between automobiles, roadway owners, and other roadway users. And that safety is proactive, right? Taking that proactive safety approach to addressing systemic issues, right? That you may see on similar roadways, and in implementing those improvements. And that redundancy is critical, right? Just addressing a safety issue one way may not be sufficient enough, that you may need some redundancy built into that. And that there are these elements, right? You saw in that wheel, right? There's the roadway user safety for all of us using the roads. It's the safe vehicles that we use, having appropriate speeds and reducing instances of speeding, having safer roads, as well as our post-crash care. You know, so if there is an incident, you know, is care arriving to the scene efficiently, and are individuals being cared for? Oh, that was a lot of high-level policy information. It may be overwhelming, but what I think is important to take away from this discussion is that we do have the alignment of state and federal policies. As I described each of those policy goals or executive orders, right? There was overlap between what the state is pursuing and what the federal government is pursuing. Environmental sustainability and greenhouse gas emission reductions are really key. Those are top for us in the transportation industry, as well as supporting and benefiting underserved communities. Right? If you've been chasing active transportation program funds, you know that having investment within the DACs or disadvantaged communities is really paramount to being able to secure funds. And then also, you know, the enhancing safety for all users and implementing Vision Zero. We've heard, we talked about the Safe Streets and Roads for All. Vision Zero is truly, you know, having that statement is important to being eligible to pursue those funds. And then lastly, I should add that all of those executive orders that I mentioned, they from the federal government, they do show up within the funding program notices of funding opportunity. So, you know, that's something that we are directly addressing within our grant applications. And I encourage you to do a little research and tie back to those, as well as I've heard in debriefs with USDOT, and they mention it exactly and go, oh, you mentioned this executive order and how you support it, check mark, you know, so that is something that grant reviewers are looking for. So here, as a course recap, just what did we all discuss here over the last 2 days? One, there are many funding programs out there at the state, regional, and federal levels. We discussed some of them today. There are still more that we didn't include, but that are out there. Know the impacts of federal funding, environmental clearance, and Caltrans involvement on your projects, because that will help you with identifying which grants you are eligible for, what you need to consider within your project scopes, schedules, and budgets. And when you're preparing prepare for grants, right, by selecting the best grant for your project, right, make sure you have that alignment, developing a strong project description and cost estimate, understanding impacts to underserved communities, do your community engagement. That is, particularly at the state level, what is being looked at strongly, and meet with the granting agencies in advance when you can, because you will learn a lot and you will help to raise your project profile. We prepare effective narratives and graphics that work together, that are symbiotic when you're talking about an issue in your narrative, and that you're able to tie that back to your graphic, and that they are basically, they're selling, they're supporting each other and selling and addressing the same issues. And then lastly, state and federal policies, guide funding programs. They do show up within the federal discretionary grant NOFOs, as well as at the state level. And that is the completion of our our training of the last 2 days. And Paul and I will hang on the line here if anyone has any questions that they have that did not get addressed, and we're happy to sit around here and discuss with you, what we've learned and how we can help you with your grant pursuits. And yes, as Dustin wrote here in the chat, please do take the time today to fill out a brief survey. That will be very helpful for us moving forward. And we want to make sure we're addressing individuals' needs and questions. So we have a question in the chat from Mary Dover. What questions do you recommend asking in meetings with the funding agencies? Sure. Yeah. I asked about, what I try to see if they'll tell me anything else about who might be coming forward with grant applications. They don't always, but sometimes they might give you an idea of what sort of projects are coming forward or what they might be looking for in a project. Ask them about the importance of the different funding policies that are out there, because in my discussions with the California Transportation Commission staff, CAPTI has come up every time. I would ask if they have any suggestions on your project about what you could discuss within your grant application in order to, increase your chances. And Paul, from your discussion that you had just yesterday with the funding agency, what other sort of questions would you recommend asking?
It was a exploratory conversation, right? So we were talking about essentially a new funding program. So I was kind of asking stuff like, well, what's been done before? And then we kept kind of hitting a wall. And then it became more clear, like, oh, well, this is the first time for that funding program. We're not really sure what we're going to get at. So it was some of that stuff about like continuity of the project. That agency is interested in funding, like catalyzing something, but then seeing that it's going to turn into something in the long term. So a lot of that was just kind of, what do you want after this project's done? What are you expecting of it? And then what's not worked in the past, right? So it was a little bit of 20 questions, trying to ask a lot and keep the dialogue going to get inside the head of the agency about that funding source. What are they expecting? How big are the projects? That kind of thing. So it's not always much of a script. I couldn't have told my staff, like, here are the 10 questions you need to ask. It just had to ebb and flow based on whatever feedback we got in the moment. So it's not a great answer, but I guess you go into some of those just with a real open mind of like, tell me about it, and you go from there. Tell me about what your goals are and start there.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Another question in the chat from Marianne is, we mentioned federal DAC definitions are different from California, and we may use different tools, not Cal Screen, for federal grants. Yes, what are these tools or other data sources? So I think, Paul, right, we included within the links on the helpful links document, there's one to a USDOT website called Areas of Persistent Poverty and Historically Disadvantaged Communities. So there, and I can't remember exactly which of the two is mapped in GIS. I think it's historically disadvantaged communities might be mapped in a GIS tool by USDOT that is available. And then there is also a table of data and you based on census tract, and you go through the census tracts in order to identify if it meets the areas of persistent poverty and historically disadvantaged communities definitions. And I will look that up quickly and just drop it in the chat as well. Paul,
And in the handout, we knew that some of these things are coming at you fast and furious. So the link that's in the chat here, Dustin provided on earlier, the course materials that are posted include the slides, the PowerPoint slides, but also one of those, the third item in the file sharing is the important links PDF. And it's stretched out to 4 pages now. But in item 5, it's the online mapping of disadvantaged communities. So the federal mapping of the areas of persistent poverty and historically disadvantaged communities, that link is provided there through that raise grants link.
And I did just drop it into the chat.
Cool. And then I think Jeff had his hand up, but it's gone now. So maybe gotta address it. Oh. Ryan, so you see this in the chat. Is HBI understood on a federal level? So yeah, my understanding is HBI is a California thing. So you'd probably could include it, but you'd have to really explain its creation, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you have to explain what it is. Yeah, and provide links. I usually provide a link to those sources within federal applications. Like it's great to, be able to do a hyperlink within the applications. It's encouraged by USDOT. And so that's how I'm able to highlight that, here's this source. This is how this source is developed. And this is what it says.
Yeah. Maybe in that case, that's where you would want to say something like the funding sources within the state of California. This is a criteria to identify areas of need, communities of need. It's one of those that satisfy. So it helps with that credibility discussion, which you're going to have to tell that story. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right, so then let's see. I think Dustin keeps putting in the chat the survey. Of course, we want to evaluate. One of the E's is evaluation, so we want to evaluate how we did. So please make sure to fill out the survey, and Ryan and I can get input from there. Most of it is multiple choice, goes through pretty quick. There's an opportunity for open-ended feedback. Definitely, we'd love to hear everyone's input. It's nice to see and get a good sense of where we stand and the quality of the presentation. This is the 3rd time we've done the course, and we're trying to figure out how we might adapt to like a 200 level course on the next one, and then whether we want to continue with more of this course going forward in the next few months.
Yeah. We've got a couple questions here in the chat, so we'll go to the first one from Susanna. If your grant is specifically for transportation, how would you convey in graphics your solutions or recommendations? Very good question, Suzanne. So we've done a couple of different things. So we will do we've done infographics where we have the concept design, and then we will call out specific items on the concept design going up. We added this intersection treatment to improve multimodal access, or we did this grade separation to reduce conflicts with trains and improve transit reliability. Right. That's one way that we've done it. That's what we've done most often, is that I refer to it almost as like a proposal graphic of what a consultant might put within their proposal to help demonstrate their understanding of a project or their solution. And that's a way to do that. And we've too in the past embedded photos as well within that graphic to show the real world condition that is being addressed by the solution.
And Shonda had asked about kind of ballpark costs for having a consultant help with grant applications. So I would start, certainly, Shonda, and for everyone else, that, is this a new grant funding program or not, right? The Clean California came out in February, or was due in February, and that was a new one. So there were a lot of question marks about how complicated it was. The Safe Streets and Roads for All, the federal one, is new. So I'm kind of wrapping my brain around how complex is this thing. Early indications are it's actually not too complicated. So level of complexity, the ATP grant funding program is pretty comprehensive and complicated, right? That, I've heard people joke that it's more difficult than the federal, whatever we're at now, raise the Tiger grants originally, but that the ATP has kind of had a bunch of cooks in the kitchen. So we just keep layering in additional questions and maps and information, that the ATP is the beast right now that is most costly. Ryan, I don't know if you know about the TSIP, but also I would say with the HSIP, that it's pretty much the same application every time. It's very quantitative based. So if someone's done that type of work in the past, then they can churn that out more quickly. If someone tells you a grant application is going to cost $50K, like that would be a lot, definitely. So that would be tremendous. It would be an expensive one. But we see more in the range of 10 to 20,000, as a ballpark for a consultant helping out. How about that TSIP, Brian?
Yeah, those ones is where when you start layering in benefit cost analyses, like are required with the TSIP program or the federal discretionary grants, the costs do go up. So that is where you do start getting into the $50,000 to $60,000 range for an application, just because there is more data work that is involved. And oftentimes we're needing to perform additional levels of transportation modeling, some off-model work to evaluate or to determine the vehicle miles traveled or the vehicle hours of delay. All of that sort of additional complexity does increase the cost to prepare the applications.
All right, so then we are pretty much finished up with our module and our recap, just helping with Q&A. But as I mentioned yesterday, we're always happy to finish up early and give everyone a little time back. But please fill out the survey, and if you have any burning questions, then feel free to submit those, and we can be available a few more minutes. Thank you all for joining.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you,
Paul. Thanks, Ryan. I'll see you again at some point, I'm sure.
Yes.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.